In 1998, the hit song Get Jiggy With It by Will Smith was guaranteed to get everybody on the dance floor. See, it was my business to know these things because as a graduate student at Cornell University, I used to DJ at student parties just to make a little extra cash. So at one of these parties, a good friend of mine introduced me to this cute and rather shy girl named Krista. Later on, I danced with her that evening, and before the night was over, I got her digits, as we called it back in the days. Not wanting to sound too desperate, I waited for exactly 48 hours before I called her, and we agreed to meet for coffee right here in the Commons. It turned out that neither one of us liked coffee, so we both had tea instead, and we spent much of the afternoon getting to know each other, just talking. About 2 weeks later, we started dating, and things were a little rocky, a little shaky at the beginning as we were both transitioning from other relationships. However, I kind of noticed that Krista and I never ran out of things to say to each other. We could spend all weekend just sitting together, enjoying each other's company, and just being in love. I had that kind of lingering feeling that, this could be the one. So, about a year later on, Krista got funding to go and do a PhD fieldwork in Cape Town, South Africa. I was happy for her, but I knew this would be quite a big test for our young relationship. While she was away, we tried our best to maintain this long-distance relationship. These are the days before Facebook and WhatsApp, so we tried to do as much as we could on email. So, about a semester later on, I got funding to go and do my own field research work in my home country, Zimbabwe. I jumped at that opportunity to make a one-week stopover in Cape Town to see Krista. The reunion was just as good as I had imagined it to be. As two young lovers who were happy to be reunited, we walked around town holding hands. We giggled and kissed as we checked out the many restaurants and the many amazing sights that Cape Town has to offer. Just a lovely place. Krista was renting an apartment in an upscale neighborhood called Sea Point. From my apartment, you could see the deep blue Atlantic Ocean. And also in the distance, you could see Robben Island, the infamous prison island where Nelson Mandela and a few other mostly black prisoners had been held captive under apartheid. Walking around town with Krista, I noticed that people would turn around and take a look at us after we'd just passed them. Initially, I just brushed this off as maybe cultural differences on public display of affection. But after a while, I started to notice a pattern. We were getting these disapproving stares from mostly older white people. See, I forgot to mention that Krista was white and I am black. And this is only a few years after the end of apartheid. So South Africa was still very much divided on racial lines. While interracial dating was now legal, it was still extremely, extremely rare. Chris and I kind of brushed off this unwanted attention, and we even reminisced on how back in Ithaca, our little beautiful 10 square miles surrounded by reality, nobody would look at us. But for the first time, we started to discuss the implications of being in an interracial relationship. While I was in town, Krista told me that she had booked a dentist appointment to get her wisdom teeth pulled out. I remarked that this was not exactly the most romantic thing to do, but I did welcome this as a sign of our growing relationship. She wanted me to be there for her for this very important medical procedure. So on the day of the appointment, we drove to downtown Cape Town where the dentist's office was located. And after filling in some paperwork, Krista laid down in the dentist's chair, and I sat a few feet next to her. With the help of a nurse, the dentist started yanking out these molars out of her mouth. And quite honestly, if you take away the white lab coats and the stainless steel utensils or tools, whatever they use, this scene looked straight out of medieval times. Very primitive. Just when they were starting to stitch up her gums, Krista started to mumble something. She was awake all this time, even though she was under a partial anesthetic. She started to mumble something and call my name. So I moved closer to her and I held her hand. Then with a mouth full of blood, she said, "Ed, I love you so much. I want to spend the rest of my life with you." Almost in tears, I said, "I love you too, babe." And this brief romantic moment was quickly interrupted by the dentist, who said something to the anesthetist in Afrikaans, which I could not understand. Then the anesthetist gave some instructions to the nurse, who hurried out of the room. I was starting to wonder if something was wrong. And then the nurse came back in after a few minutes with these long legal forms. Basically, the form said something to the extent of, the patient may not be held liable for whatever he or she says while they're under the influence of the anesthetic. I thought this was a little bit odd. As I was filling these forms, I noticed that all the staff in that room were white, and I started to wonder if this situation maybe would have been handled a little differently if I'd been white as well. After all, if this was just routine paperwork, they probably should have just given this to me when we checked in. So after the procedure, we got back in the car and I started driving back to Chris's apartment. She was still sedated, so I played some of her favorite music and I enjoyed listening to her mumbling to some of the lyrics. When we got to her apartment, I parked on the curbside and I walked over to the passenger side to help Krista out of the car. She got out of the car, stood up, and she said, "Ed, I don't feel good." Then she turned very pale, whiter than I'd ever seen her. And then she passed out. Instinctively, I grabbed her just before she hit the ground and I held her up in my arms. I screamed, "Help! Help!" And I looked around to see if anybody was looking at us. A few people in the nearby apartment balconies and people out of their windows started to scream, "Help, help, somebody help!" Initially, I was quite relieved to know that help was on the way. But then after a while, I realized that these people were talking to each other. None of them were talking to me. They were ignoring me as if I wasn't there at all. And in that moment, time seems to have just frozen. As I looked up at all those faces looking up out of their apartments, out of their balconies and windows, I noticed for the first time that all the faces were white. It then dawned on me how this scene might look like for them. There I was, a young black man, holding the body of very limp body of a young white woman who was now bleeding profusely out of her mouth. These people did not know me. What had they done to her? What had they done to her? I started to wonder. Those cries for help were not for me. These were cries to help rescue this poor girl from me. I started to fear for my own life. I recalled that South Africa was well known for this mob justice where people got injured or even killed for even the most petty of crimes. I knew that with such a history of racial tension, even if the police arrived there, they probably could easily misread this situation. I felt vulnerable and confused. I could not tell the difference between my own paranoia versus what was happening out there. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably just a few minutes, 2 men showed up and approached me. They were very well built, construction workers who were working on a nearby apartment. They demanded to know what was going on. In a very shaky, scared voice, I said to them, "This is my girlfriend. She just been to the dentist and I just need help getting her to my apartment." They did not seem to believe me. And one of them just said, "Look, guy, we'll take it up from here." And reluctantly, I handed Krista over to them. I then led the way to the apartment and they walked behind me carrying her, still not sure what was going on. I got to her apartment, I unlocked the door, and I immediately started to look for any evidence at all to show these guys that I was indeed their boyfriend. You will be amazed how difficult it is to prove this simple little fact. First, I opened a closet, I pointed to my clothes, and then I pointed to the suitcase in the corner. But that was not convincing. This could belong to any man. In desperation, I even pointed out to my Afro comb and my CD of R. Kelly, just to show them that she at least had a black boyfriend or something. Then after a while, I saw this little picture frame sitting on the windowsill. And in this picture was Krista and me, taken up in the beautiful Adirondacks. The picture looked like a perfect postcard of 2 young people in love. Finally, the 2 men looked convinced. Around that point, Krista started to regain her consciousness. Perfect timing. I explained to her what had just happened. She smiled and whispered to me, "I love you so much, Ed." And then she told this man that, she was okay. I looked at them, they were starting to look very uncomfortable. I thanked them for helping me very politely, and I asked them to please leave us alone. That moment of near panic left me with so many questions running in my head. How much could our relationship endure in a society that was so racially polarized? How could I ever tell the difference between my own biases versus this passive-aggressive racism that was out there? And even when the rules and laws and regulations say otherwise, are we really free to love whoever we want? I had all these questions running in my head, but there was one thing that was as clear to me as daylight. And that is, twice that day, in the most unfiltered moments, with blood in her mouth, Krista had declared her love for me. And 20 years later, right here in Ithaca, we're still getting jiggy with it. Thank you.